Peter Roffey. He's in Guernsey and I'm in Jersey. This won't be brilliant quality of picture because it picks up glare and I'm filming it off the screen, but it'll be a John Gollop quality production. So I've known Peter Roffey in a peripheral way for about 40 years, and we got to know each other initially back in the day. I don't think even Stuart Siver, I think he was still at school, Stuart Siver, or he just left school, and it was through Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and nuclear issues, which is not a burning issue today. Everybody wants electricity, they don't mind where it comes from. So I'm exactly the same person. This is what I'm very conscious of. My views haven't changed at all. So Peter can tell us, have your views changed? Are you the same person as you were 40 years ago?
At core I am. I still have the same philosophy of life. I still have the same concerns and same things I want to achieve on behalf of the community. But yeah, I think I've probably matured a bit, like a good wine, I hope. But and there's no denying that when you get dragged into the machinery of government, you do actually worry about the practical issues, the day-to-day issues about balancing the books, raising the revenue. How do you do it? How do you make sure there's enough housing for everybody, the healthcare service, education? So you can't just be on the radical edge, worrying about perhaps the more flamboyant issues, but nevertheless I still care deeply about things like the environment and like social equity, like anti-discrimination, all of those things that both of us were concerned about all those years ago.
But they are still there, aren't they? All those issues. This is what I find. I mean, I'm looking through this little magazine which you were involved in. I don't know if I'll put it there so the camera can pick it up. There it is. Radical Island Press, which
yeah, and of course shortened to RIP.
RIP, RIP. Yeah. Rest in peace. And it was a brilliant. It was like a private eye dealing with Guernsey issues, and I said that's a good idea. I want that in Jersey, and I took it on here, and it was produced. In fact, initially they couldn't sell enough of them. The shops were demanding more, which was another aspect of life. Then there were independent newsagents. You could get it into shops. I don't know if there are new independent newsagents anymore, but it was an excellent effort. It's the sort of social media of the day, wasn't it? This was technology. The print is extremely small, which is something I had forgotten. It's unreadable, a lot of it, because it's so small. But there were
the wonky headlines is to do with me and Lecraset not getting on too well. But yeah,
right. I mean, we did issues as the Jewish girls who disappeared from I mean, there was lots of very serious issues, lots of funnies, a music page. It was a very good little magazine, and there was a demand. And there is a demand, but social media doesn't supply it in the same sort of way. It's very, as you well know, social media is very spiteful. There's a lot of spitefulness out there, which wasn't in these. RIP wasn't a spiteful production, I don't think. It was useful. I think it was useful in its day, wasn't it? Tell me it was useful.
I agree, and it could do more depth than you tend to do online. I'm not saying people don't do serious journalism and then post it online and there's a commentary on it, but the vast majority, 99% of social media is just sounding off, isn't it? And I think RIP went, I'm not saying it was sort of serious, in-depth journalism, but it did go under the surface more than you can do just with posting on Facebook or Twitter.
Yeah, I don't know why it died. Anyway, obviously you got elected. That was one thing. I don't know, what year did you first get elected? When did you?
Sorry,
when did you first get elected to the States?
St Patrick's Day, 1982.
82. Okay. Oh, so you were already a member when this magazine first came out.
I still did a little bit of surreptitious writing for it after I was a deputy. That's true.
It's like in those days, I mean, I remember people in Guernsey like Dan Le Cheminot, Eric Walters. Are those characters, are they still around? Is there the sort of Labour, there was a Labour group in Guernsey. Now, there was a sort of a feeling that there ought to be. I mean, Guernsey was a different island. It was a different island. I used to be amazed that when I'd go in the morning, you walk out in the morning, people would say good morning to you. That was always an interesting sign to me. It wasn't something I was used to. I was a city boy. And Jersey was the same. They were a bit like that. Oh, they didn't. Guernsey, it doesn't matter where you were, they'd say good morning to you. And I thought this is rather something, there is something, a much more working class based island. And of course it was. But are those characters, the Eric Walters, are they still around?
Yeah, I think there's one or two. I mean, I would say his successor's political philosophy are probably to the right of Eric, but there's always a few token, it just sounds patronising, but basic Guernsey people everybody really likes because their trait is clearly unaffected. It is just, I am an ordinary person. And there's a few of those in the States, but it's probably less than it used to be. And I think the public are demanding that less. They want a bit more sophistication, a bit more in-depth analysis of issues, which is a shame because of course that bit of politics is important, but Parliament also has to be representative, and therefore it ought to have a cross-section of the community in to some degree.
The question of who represents who is one of the big issues with me. I've become very pessimistic because the idea that somebody is your elected representative, but they're not. Now, it's the old Edmund Burke argument from Bristol, funny enough. He was Bristol MP back in the 18th century. And that was the great discussion with him. Do you elect me for my views, or am I there to represent your views? And how can you represent if you've got a constituency of several thousand people, how can you represent their views?
It's a balance, isn't it? I think people do elect you to use your judgment. You've got more time and space to go into the issues that come up than the public. They've got a life. They're not going to be studying all of these issues in depth. So I think you do owe your electorate your judgment. But at the same time, if you're totally insensitive to public opinion, then while you're not a delegate, you're a representative. You still have to appreciate that the community have certain mores, and even if you don't necessarily agree with them, you have to at least take them into account in your decision making.
Because what's interesting now, because the weird election you're about to have with 100 and how many candidates?
119.
119 candidates chasing 38 seats.
Yeah.
Now, right. But there is a sort of a party system growing, three-party-ish, but they're not parties. They don't have a central philosophy, do they?
They don't, no. I mean, if I vote Labour, then I'm voting, of course, for broad church, but I know more or less the range of views that they would have. Likewise for the Tories. Here, I see parties, and I know some of the individuals, and I think they're at opposite ends of the political spectrum. Yeah. How can they be a party? And then, of course, they turn around and say, we're a party, but we're not a party. So I'm not quite sure what's going on, to be honest. As an outsider, not being part of Guernsey, I see it as more for the convenience of the candidates, so they can work together, getting themselves elected. I don't see it as particularly in the favour of the electorate, particularly. I don't think it helps them very much at all. Yeah, no, I think you're right. You see, I personally like our non-party system, but I can see the advantage of parties if they're offering a comprehensive policy programme, and then that helps the voter choose. If we vote this lot in and they get a majority, this is what we can expect them to implement. And the other lot will do something different. But they're not, that positive side of party politics isn't emerging. None of them are offering a proper, what I would call a policy programme to the electorate.
Just to give your people in Guernsey some news, Maurice Kirk was a candidate way back in the 40 years ago, and he almost got elected. He could have been your chief minister by now, but he didn't. He just missed it by a bit. He was, as always...
He didn't just miss being chief minister, he just missed being elected, yeah.
He was being arrested again the other day. He was being taken to court. He was found not guilty, so he got away with that. But he's still exactly the same. Some of your listeners will know he's still the same Morris. Still carry on exactly always was. Raises some good points, raises some very silly points. But he does, and one of the issues in that little magazine was Clamour to Harrow, which is, of course, he raised. That was the sort of issue that little magazine was dealing with quite a lot. And human rights issues, there was quite a lot of that sort of thing, which I don't know who deals with it, because I despair of Jersey lawyers. I don't know much about Guernsey lawyers. That they don't really take up the cause for the underdog, do they? And this is where states members ought to come in. They ought to be taking up the slack.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are one or two lawyers, to be fair. Nick Barnes's name springs to mind, who would very much almost waive fees. Sorry, Nick, I shouldn't say that, in order to fight for the underdog at times. But you're right. And, it's not just the legal profession, it's the business profession as well. I business community. I was part of the Social Security Committee that just recently brought proposals on anti-discrimination laws to the states. Right. And you wouldn't believe the level of opposition that the Chamber of Commerce and the IOD raised, sort of saying this is going to be a burden on us to treat people equally. So, nothing's changed in that respect. Yeah, if you're at the vanguard of social reform, you get a difficult time. And then 20 years later, of course, what you were saying was regarded as absolutely mainstream, and nobody knows why there was an argument about it.
There's a couple of fundamental things I want to know. If I don't know whether you'll know the answer. Jersey's had this horrendous child abuse case going on, inquiry, all that. Why hasn't Guernsey had the similar sort of thing?
Well, I think everywhere in the world probably there was and it is abuse inside institutional settings. I'm afraid that is unavoidable. I don't think there was. Well, certainly, I mean, some of the allegations, of course, about corpses and bits of coconut, bits of skulls and whatever were proven to be an exaggeration, but clearly there was a particularly significant problem with abuse in Jersey. It may be that Guernsey simply didn't have that level of abuse, although it would be an act of denial to say that it didn't go on. Or it may be just that nobody's got to the bottom of it in the way they have in Jersey. But I think if there had been such a broad-scale abuse, you would have had more survivors coming forward, approaching people like myself and saying, look, I want you to take this up. And I was certainly open to that. And some people did speak to me and talk about their experiences in children's homes, but nothing like the sort of scale in Jersey.
The other aspect of that, which is now fun, we've got a children's commissioner, and there is a report going off to the United Nations. They've asked for a report. Is Guernsey responding to that? Are they sending a response to Geneva? Are they going out there?
We are signing up to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We're not going down the commissioner route, but our plan for children, our children's law, very much embraces the, which was all originally set up by the late Jean Pritchard, who was also, of course, involved in the magazine you were talking about. Right. So going down a similar route, but we're not the commissioner route. I think that probably sprang out in Jersey out of the scandal that happened, and because it wasn't so high on the Richter scale in Guernsey, we haven't embraced that.
Of course, we've got a commissioner, we've got a minister for children, and we've got a children's rights. What they all do, I don't know what they're all supposed to. Anyway, the other thing which is a great mystery for me is why doesn't Guernsey need a new hospital?
Well, almost do. There's I think £120 million scheme. I know that's peanuts compared to what you're doing. To modernise the PEH site and to repurpose it and to rebuild it. But we have constantly reinvested. I mean, when I was here, we had phase 4, which was a clinical block. Phase 5, which was a new psychiatric unit, was planned and put into place. And this new one, I don't think they're calling it phase 6, but it is. We have constantly been developing our main hospital site. So it's been a rolling programme, if you like.
One thing I hadn't realised, I was over there last year sometime before we all got locked down, and the bus, just a normal bus, it went through the hospital site. And that was one thing I thought, well, that's quite amazing because it's on the transport route. That's one thing. That's a huge problem here.
Just about every bus that goes from town anywhere towards the west of town goes through the hospital site. The number of routes that go to the hospital are amazing. So it is really accessible from that point of view, which is great to see. And
being just a couple of miles out of town, because they got this obsession with putting it in town, it makes no difference, does it?
It doesn't need to be in town. It really doesn't. Not everybody lives in town. Not everybody works in town. So the idea that the only convenient place to get to a hospital is in town, I think, is a fallacy. In fact, traffic-wise, it can be harder to work your way into a capital because you tend to have queues, particularly at some times of the day, whereas plunk something in the middle of the island and it's fairly accessible from all quarters. So the last thing I'm going to do is start telling Jersey where to put their new hospital. No. I know that you're totally efficient in that respect and across that and have had no hesitation in finding the right site.
Well, yeah, we should certainly find one. So I think Guernsey would be a good site for it.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you're willing to pay, well, we're happy to take it.
I thought
you can have our rubbish in return.
That's right. I thought the tunnel project was a good one. Then we could share a hospital. Then in that case, it might be a cheaper option. How do you manage about I'm always mystified by Guernsey agriculture. You don't keep on about it. You don't keep on about your cows. You've got cows. You don't grow potatoes commercially. Tomatoes, I presume, are more or less finished.
It's really niche now. Yeah.
How do you justify having agricultural land? Because it's an obsession here. It's the tradition, it's the way of life. We can't possibly build on agricultural land, but it's really dying the death. Agriculture will die in Guernsey. That's my prediction. It is dying. Why isn't it dead in Guernsey? It seems to be dead, more or less.
There's the dairy industry, and then there's arable agriculture. On dairy, we are self-sufficient for milk. Like you, we feel quite passionately about our iconic cow. Of course, ours is slightly better than yours, but that's an argument for another day. I think Guernsey people want a countryside. We're really quite densely developed, as you know, but we want to maintain some countryside, and actually, just being purely pragmatic, the cheapest way to maintain a pleasant countryside is to have a farming industry, so long as it's done in the right way.
Much of one. You haven't got much. I mean, the potatoes are only for your own consumption, as far as I can make out. You don't export spuds.
No, I think we take the view that it's a bit hypocritical to export liquid milk and ban its import for sale. We do export other products. We certainly export butter and cheese and things like that, but we don't try to export liquid milk, because we feel that if we're saying nobody can bring milk in for sale, we shouldn't be exporting it. Jersey seems to take a different approach, and one day I think they may be challenged on that.
On this election, this mysterious election you're about having now, an all-island election, 38 seats, which are, how are the seats allocated? Does it matter if you vote for, you're standing for election, not for any particular area, just standing for election?
Yeah. The 38 people with the highest number of votes from across the island will be elected to the States of Deliberation. And voters can vote for up to 38 candidates. They can vote for one or two, of course. They can vote for 10 or 15, but they can vote for up to 38 candidates out of the 119. It's going to be a challenge, I think, to the less politically engaged trying to praise 119 people and decide which ones to vote for. I do fear it's the known names. It's going to be really difficult for talented members who aren't well known to stand out from the crowd. But, it's a system that was chosen by referendum, so we have to respect that and give it our best shot.
A disappointing number of women candidates, as far as I can see.
Yeah. It's not representative at all, is it? And I don't really know why that is. I mean, women candidates, I think, have a good record of being elected, at least as high as percentage of women candidates are elected than male candidates, but fewer seem to come forward. And I think sociological study is well overdue to find out why in Guernsey so few women actually put themselves forward. Maybe it's just the unpleasantness that is an aspect of politics these days. Social media is very aggressive, and it's particular type of person that can cope with that. And I'm not suggesting all of those people are men, and no men are thin-skinned, and that no females can't brush it off. But I think maybe, and I respect them for this, I think maybe women have a bit more sensitivity than men at times, and maybe that's why they just like that sort of atmosphere.
What's the salary? Everybody on the same salary if those elected?
Yeah, it's 40 grand, yeah.
40.
With uplifts for some of the more major jobs. We don't have a flat salary system like Jersey. So the president of the Policy and Resources Committee gets paid more, and then you step down to members of that committee and the presidents of the other key committees. But ordinary foot soldiers like myself, it is 40,000.
Now, I wouldn't have thought 38 seats was enough, because they say they want to reduce the number of seats here. There's not enough to do the job properly, that's why. So how are you spreading out now under this new system with Parish? How do the parishes fit in?
The parishes won't come into it at all.
No.
Just forget parishes. In fact, I was asked to go on the official state's website what parish, and I put irrelevant. They made me change it to St Andrew because they said that doesn't fit the system. But under this new system, the parishes are, you could have all 38 being Tortable residents. Well, I don't think there's.
Yeah, but no, I was thinking the administering of the parishes, because they used to have a structure, and
we still have douzanes. Do the sort of collection of the rubbish, the inspection of the hedges and dwits and all that sort of thing. But we don't. The parishes no longer have any direct representation in central government, and their own personal representatives disappeared quite some years ago.
Right.
But of course, when you had districts, their deputy was sort of expected to take up. Because
when I went, I interviewed a couple of I think they were parish constables, where they were doing, I forget what they were, and they used to call parish meetings to discuss the the stuff that was going to the States, so they could discuss that with the parishioners. Not all of them, just a few did that. Is that still going to carry on? Is that up to the parishes?
It is up to the parishes, but I mean, even when we merged from 10 districts, which were each of the parishes, into 7, which were roughly equal size, I noticed that I represent at the moment, until this next election, the southeast of Guernsey, which is St Martin's and St Andrews,
right?
And they don't call the deputies in to meet with the Douzane as often as they used to do when it was like one district for each parish. So I think the parish element of it is tending to go out and it's still going on, but it's tending to be dislocated from central government, if you like.
Because you could be a member, a parish representative, and within the parish, and the state's representative. Is that still possible?
Oh, it's still possible, but the douzaneer or constable would then, when they're in the States, would have a totally different hat on. They wouldn't be representing their area. They'd obviously have a feel for it and would put forward their issues, but they would be an island-wide representative.
So they could be 2. They couldn't be 3. They couldn't be a constable, a douzaneer, and a state's deputy.
You can't be a constable and a douzaneer, no, because the douzane is typically made up of 12 members, hence the name, although Valence and Peterborough are slightly different, and then you have a junior constable and a senior constable, and the 2 are. I don't know. Actually, interesting point. Maybe you can be a douzaneer and a constable at the same time, but if you are, you tend to just be referred to as a constable.
Obviously, it's a great issue here about the constables. Should they be in the States as well? My view, obviously, is no, they shouldn't be in the States as well.
I have no problem with them being in the States if they want to put themselves forward for elected as
deputy. To be elected
both a deputy and a constable. Exactly. I don't think a constable should have an automatic right. And one of the problems, if I may comment on Jersey politics, is the number of uncontested seats that happen in Jersey. It's quite extraordinary. I mean, it's years since we've had an uncontested seat in Guernsey.
Really. And of course, this guarantees, as far as the States is concerned, they've got to be contested, haven't they? Unless you had 37 candidates, I don't know what you'd have one. I don't know what you'd do if you only had 37, but obviously you've got 100 and whatever it is, so they're going to be well and truly contested. One of the aspects of Jersey is you get candidates who put up for one election, they never did anything before, they never do anything afterwards. Is that likely to happen in this election? Obviously you've got a lot of new faces.
It's really hard to call what's going to happen with this election. It's virgin territory for me almost as much as it is for everybody else. I don't know if it's going to favour the incumbents, whether it's going to favour newcomers with angry people who always dislike their government voting en masse to keep out the incumbents. I think it's going to be fascinating when we see the result come through. I could speculate, but I'm really not from a very informed base, to be honest.
Do your parish officials get paid at all? Do they get expenses or something for being constables?
No, so entirely, I don't know, they may get some expenses, I'm not sure. I think they get the parish dinner paid for at Christmas out of some of the charges that they make on us. But no, basically it's an entirely voluntary position, and I think we're all grateful for the fact that there's, hundreds of people that actually fill those posts for nothing.
You've got 2 strange parishes offshore, Sark and Alderney.
Or they're not parishes, don't
well, as I say, what are they? Because they fit in.
They're separate jurisdictions, of course. They're in the same bailiwick, but they're completely separate jurisdictions. Right. Although in Alderney's case, they have chosen to enter into a symbiotic relationship with Guernsey, and we have a joint treasury. Sark have decided to plough their own furrow very much more.
Exactly.
But both of them could go off and have nothing to do with Guernsey, other than in certain elements of the law. The bailiwick really refers to the legal system rather than any political unity.
If the UK government does, because it has sort of threatened to intervene in Sark, and Sark is struggling population-wise, so we're told. I don't know, I don't live there, I don't know what's going on, but there are problems, and they've had electricity turned off for some, which is quite serious. I mean, it's a problem now, and Alderney the same is having a depopulation problem, so somebody at the end of the day could find themselves with a problem, and it might be the UK government, or it could be Guernsey. Have you got any clues what's happening?
Well, just first to say, Alderney's depopulation does seem to have arrested and stabilised at around 2000. It does, in fact, it's gone up slightly over the last few years, but connectivity is an issue for Alderney. It's damned expensive to maintain decent connectivity by air to Alderney, but at the same time, without it, it's a struggle to keep the population up, and particularly the young population. So, yeah, it's far more in the crosshairs of the UK. They're clearly concerned about some aspects of governance, and I think they expect to be able to just go in and solve that, but of course, constitutionally, we can't. We can suggest things, and as you said, we might actually the blowback from any problems there, because many years ago the Kilbrandon report suggested that a failure of good governance in the island would allow the UK government to legislate and govern for us. Now, I don't think that was ever necessarily accepted locally, but it's certainly in the UK psyche. So it's a worry, and I hope SART can rise to the challenge.
Yeah, your sound's getting a bit wobbly. I think we're still okay. Of course, in these little magazines which I showed you, Mr. Fowkes used to feature quite a lot. He wasn't the first to come, and George Fowkes, and he was seen as public enemy #1. And he was a guest of mine. I brought him over. I was very keen to have MPs looking at the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man.
Yeah, Alf Dobbs was another one who then went on, of course, to famously pursue the refugee issue more recently as a far older man. But I remember him as a younger man in Guernsey also looking at some of these issues. So, yeah, I mean, outside scrutiny is fine, but at the same time, I think the UK need to appreciate the constitutional relationship and not assume that they can just govern us for the sake of it.
No, but I mean, I saw good reasons why, but then I don't share many views with a lot of local people. I don't share the view. It's not that I want to disagree with them, but I just find that their analysis of the relationship isn't necessarily correct. I mean, historically, it's had a rather strange view of what the relationship is, and I thought they've taken it, for example, from Dice's book, which was really a very much an amateur, a bit like me, historian's view of the Channel Islands, and I don't think it was very constitutionally correct. But however, history accepts these things, doesn't it? You know, that's as we say. Well,
I don't think you and I see quite eye to eye on this, but you're right that sometimes people's view of our relationship can be coloured by local myth. I remember not that many years ago, Guernsey was celebrating 800 years of loyalty to the British Crown, and I had to point out that didn't really add up because we were on the other side in the Civil War, unlike Jersey. We were with Parliament, not with the Crown, but I was told, we've forgotten about that.
I've just been reading some of the original documents from that on the Privy Council, and it's very interesting reading of that, trying to pacify the situation, trying to repair the damage, trying to, of course, we've got a battle to come, haven't we? We have a shared battle. The Brexit is not resolved. It might have gone away, might have gone to sleep. And I can't see how it's going to come out well for the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man, personally. But that's my view. I think it's going to be some frighteners in there.
There's certainly a lot of risk there, and we're going to have to be amazingly quick to respond and light on our feet because, we're talking about months, Brexit's happened, but months away from the end of the transition period. We've no idea what, if any, trade deal is going to happen between the UK and the EU, and dependent on that, it could have a huge impact on the islands. That's going to... the new states in Guernsey are certainly have to hit the ground running in October because that is going to be one of the surprising,
because I ran for election and there was a by-election in Guernsey and I ran on a Brexit ticket. Not that I wanted it, I just wanted people to discuss it. But there hasn't, to me, I wanted a good discussion between people of Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man to see if there was a common policy amongst the people. And there hasn't been that discussion. So I don't know whether what Guernsey wants is the same as what Jersey wants, and certainly not whether it's the same as what the people of Isle of Man want.
I mean, the Crown dependencies do tend to regard themselves as competitors rather than compatriots far too often. I mean, for instance, the zero tax rate of corporation tax. I think that if the three communities had worked together more, we could have a structure of taxation that allowed business to contribute slightly more to the cost of running the islands and the individual slightly less. But of course, it depends on all three signing up, because if it's one or two, it just hands a competitive advantage to the other. So we have been in a bit of a race to the bottom between ourselves, I think.
The local newspaper in both islands is now not the little cosy little local newspaper that it used to be. They're both, I mean, whether they will survive, because lots of newspapers are closing down and they're finding... Is that a possibility? Do you think that they will lose their newspapers? Jersey
I think it's a real possibility. I don't know the Jersey Evening Post as well as I know the Guernsey Press, but I can see that the number of journalists they employ now is much smaller than it used to be a few years ago. Obviously, an awful lot of the advertising revenue they used to rely on is now being spent online instead of on paper. And even though they sometimes give me a difficult time, I would really regret it if we lost our daily paper. Doesn't mean I think that it's always right. I think it's often wrong, but I think it would be a real important aspect of local life gone. But I suppose it's a use it or lose it situation, isn't it? And societies do change, and sadly,
you used to write in the Guernsey. Do you still write? You used to write in the Guernsey Press, didn't you?
I do. I haven't done for the last 6 months because I always feel that it's unfair for a candidate to have that level of exposure in the run-up to an election. But the arrangement is that I will, whether I'm elected or not, we'll go back to writing them for them on the other side of the election.
Right. Yes, it would be. I think it would. I think a place needs a newspaper. I mean, even my little Humber effort there from the 1980s, it was an attempt to communicate thoughts, wasn't it? And if they're not communicating, if people don't share their thoughts, I think it's very dangerous, potentially dangerous. In fact, I went to somebody's 90th birthday party yesterday, and most of the people at my end of the table were people who'd come through the occupation, and they were saying things which rather surprised me, that the lockdown under the Nazis was not as bad as the lockdown we've just come through, and I thought it's a rather unusual view, isn't it? Because we all think, well, that must have been terrible, the occupation, and it was pretty bloody terrible. But there were aspects of it, like our human rights under lockdown were much more infringed than they were under the Nazis. So it's strange, isn't it? Has that been a discussion in Guernsey about the human rights aspects of lockdown?
Yeah, I think it's becoming increasingly so. Of course, our travel restrictions are much stricter than yours.
Right.
Until very recently, it was 14-day isolation if you returned,
right.
And now it's 7 days, so it's going to be reviewed in October. But basically, with 7-day isolation, unless you've got a really burning reason to go off the island, you don't go. So very few people have left the island since March or arrived in the island. And for me, that's not too bad. I've not been able to go on holiday to the Greek islands, which I miss, but it's not the end of the world. But an awful lot of our workforce, of course, are from the UK or elsewhere. All of their family are there. Right. And I think it's getting to the point where I think balancing the human right issue with the health risk and obviously the wanting to protect the more vulnerable in our community is, I think, a bigger issue than some locals like to think. They are, let's keep lockdown until a vaccine come along and, ordinary life has returned to Guernsey. Well, that's fine for those of us who are from here, but I think, we're going to find it hard to recruit to key posts. So I think a grown-up debate is needed, and I suspect it's been suspended ahead of the election just because it's too difficult to have. People know it's going to upset one branch of the public or the other, depending on what your view is.
We just reported today there was a big XP environmentalist demonstration in London and different places, and they were using the lockdown legislation, and they've been fining them £10,000 each. A lot of them, and many of them have been fined, in other words, for doing a political demonstration, which again, that is pretty worrying to me, because this is where we came in. We were demonstrating on environmental issues, and the idea that people might be wanting to express a view on gathering in a group to express a view on environmental issues, and they are pretty serious environmental issues, and they use a different law to fine them effectively, could ruin some of them, £10,000 fines. I thought that was a worrying trend, and I think there's a lot of... laws get used for the purpose they weren't intended, don't they? This is one of the worrying things all the time.
Well, that is certainly should be a premise with all legislation, that it's there for what it's there for, and the spirit of the law and the purpose of the law should be regarded. But in modern government, I'm afraid that's not always the case. Sometimes here's a convenient bit of legislation, we'll use that. I haven't got a lot more time, Mike, I have to say.
Okay, I will stop. I mean, whether the public will listen to us for this long, I don't know. I too tend to ramble on. I will stop there.
How do you publish it then? Do you just
it
publish
goes
it
on.
online?
I put them on. I publish it online, and I put it on Facebook and then individual, whatever. And I might chop it in two halves. I don't do it. But
Bring it
strangely
up.
enough, I'm getting on my Mike Dunn Facebook site. I'm getting a great deal of traffic from Guernsey and the Isle of Man and the other overseas territories. Oh, I don't know why. And there always seems to be a great shortage of Facebook sites in Guernsey for discussion. There's a politics Jersey, which is very busy. Not my group, but there's not one for Guernsey. There's not a politics Guernsey group, is there? It's very.
I think there's a closed site, which I've chosen not to join because I don't particularly want to be in closed groups. And then there's something which I think it tends to be. Are we still recording, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something called Guernsey People Have Your Say, which I've never visited.
Yeah,
In fact, I have to join it in order to visit it, and I don't know whether I want to join it without visiting it. So. But other than that, no, I don't think there is. But I'm relatively new to social media, I have to say.
Right.
So I don't probably know my way around as well as you do.
In the next 40 years, you'll get to be used to social media.
Well, if I'm here in 40 years, then I'll be pleased to be involved in social media.
Thanks for that. We'll stop there. Thanks for your help. And I hope this comes out reasonably well. It's viewable. Thanks, Peter.
You're very welcome. Okay, Mike. Nice to talk. Cheerio for now.